Hey everybody, this is Nathaniel Provincia with my very good friend Dr. Worcester. What's up, buddy? How you doing, man?
Hey, great to see you, pal.
And the name of the show is the Community Connection, and I don't think there's any better connection than Sharon Thomas. Sharon Thomas went to Minnieville Elementary in Northern Virginia, where she was a kid, and oddly enough, her sister actually taught at Minnieville Elementary. And for the listeners who may not know, I was the principal of Minnieville Elementary. Actually had the pleasure of working with your sister, Sharon, for 1 year. It was a very quick relationship, boom, 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 in and out. But it's all good. And look at you. And now you're on the Community Connection. Sharon, where are you now? Where do you reside now?
I'm in the great city of Baltimore. Once I got out of college, my husband and I moved to Maryland not long after that. And so first in the DC area in Montgomery County, and then several years later moved to Cecil County, which for folks on the Eastern Seaboard, you might know it as the last place where you can stop for a rest stop before in Maryland before you get to Delaware. And that's where I did my teaching and my instructional coaching and lived for many years. And then a few years after that, my husband and I moved down here to Baltimore.
Charm City.
I love it so much.
If I had to go to Baltimore to get the best crab cake, where do I go?
Controversial issue.
Yes.
Needless to say. So, and I haven't had a bad one, but I think the best one I've had, they're actually the ones our mayor prefers as well. So I do have like an authority figure backing me on this. It's at a pub in Northeast Baltimore, which is kind of where I am, I'm sort of centrally located, but in the Northeast quadrant, called Coda's Pub, Coco's Pub, sorry, Koko's Pub. And they're amazing and delicious.
There you go. I'm writing it down. We're going to get it. Coco's. Let's do it. Let's do it, Dr. Worcester.
So Sharon, how do you say the name of the place where you're living?
Baltimore? Oh, you think in Balmer?
Because some people say that, right?
Well, I'm a transplant because I don't say Balmer.
Yeah. Gotcha.
And I don't say that we're going down the ocean, but there are lots of people around here who do talk that way, so it's okay.
All right. Sharon, can you just give us, I know you mentioned a few things, can you just give us a broad overview of your educational background, what you've been doing, where you started, where you are now?
Sure. So since those Prince William County early days where I spent elementary and middle school, then my family moved to Stafford County where I graduated from high school. And then I went to 2 universities for undergraduate. My first 2 years were at Virginia Tech. Second 2 years were at James Madison University. And then, as I mentioned, after I married, we moved to Maryland. And so when I started teaching in Cecil County Public Schools, I started my master's program at Towson University. And spent my whole career as an educator in Cecil County for the most part.
So Sharon, tell us a little bit about your current role, which is something that we're really excited about. Our show is always about connecting leaders with leaders, and there's a lot of different topics that we cover on the Community Connection. And technically I'm a coach, but I'm not really a coach. You know what I mean? And like Eric works with coaches. So I would just love to know like this current role that you have and how you've, and like the things that you're really getting out of this tremendous role that you're in.
Well, and I kind of see where I am now as sort of it's just where everything I've done professionally has kind of placed me there. And it's interesting because I started out just wanting to be a teacher since I was in 2nd grade and loving the idea of having a grade book and giving assignments and all the things. And once I became a teacher, I had a really magnificent principal as my first principal, Dr. Diette Devine at Elkton High School in Elkton, Maryland. And she was a true instructional leader, and she was very focused on professional learning for staff. And I was a PD nerd right from the start and really loved that. Saw the negativity that a lot of people had toward it and learned as a PD leader, what some of the reasons were behind it, some strategies to deal with that. But it was really once I was coached myself and my school district had adopted Jim Knight's instructional coaching model that I started to have a deeper understanding of what it takes to try to help an adult in ways that are very different from helping a child. And that ended up leading me into becoming an instructional coach in my district as well, a few years after I was coached. And that led me working with Jim Knight in various ways as part of my district work with him. And then after being in that combination coach and teacher role for several years, I then went to work for him at the Instructional Coaching Group. That led me to an even deeper knowledge of adult learning theory and to implementation science, and essentially what it takes to be able to support people in how they do their job, whatever that job may be. And that fundamentally everything, just as it does with children in a classroom, fundamentally everything with adults in a workplace comes down to how you treat people. And it sounds kind of cliched to say that, and it seems like it's common sense, but it's usually the first thing that goes out the window once people feel under pressure, under stress, in an emergency, which educators feel that way all the time. And so we inadvertently end up treating people in ways that sort of undermine all the good work we're trying to do. And so since working for ICG, now I, a couple years ago, moved into working for the Touchstones discussion project, which was another thing that had been really valuable for me as a teacher. We use Touchstones in the classroom with our students, grades 3 to 12 in my district, to help teach students how to have civil discourse, how to collaborate, how to share leadership with each other, how to elevate other people's voices and that sort of thing. And so seeing what that looked like with children, now working at Touchstones, trying to help schools to implement Touchstones, is bringing all of that teaching experience, the coaching experience, implementation science, adult learning theory, and not only using that to try to support students in schools, but now using it to support adults in various community programs like retirement communities or in for incarcerated people and so on. So all of that is so built on the idea of leadership, what it takes to help lead people, what it takes to support people. And so I feel like at this point, this current job is bringing all of that together.
Fantastic.
Sharon, can I ask just a basic question? I think many people are familiar with the instructional coach role. As a former principal, I didn't have one. Nathaniel, you didn't have one, correct?
Not an instructional coach. I had, as a Title I school, we had like reading support,
right?
Math support, mainly through like Title I. And it was interesting because some coaches came into the mindset of I only coach individuals. And then I had some coaches who had the mindset as well, I want to coach teams. And then I had some folks who was like, I want to work with kids and let folks watch me so I can kind of parallel play. And so it was like the idea of coaching was just all over the place. And I didn't know if that was like de facto, de jure, or whatever, but I loved them. I loved my coaches because I'm a one-trick pony.
That's what I want to ask. Sharon, is there a difference between like a reading specialist and like a Title I math and an instructional coach? So is there kind of a definition for what an instructional coach is?
Yes, and both hitting on one of the key issues when you talk about instructional coaching, instructional support in schools, which is that years ago, 20-ish years ago, when Jim sort of coined that term of instructional coaching, already things existed like reading specialists, numeracy specialists, and so forth. And so people sort of assumed, oh, that's all of those things, or that's the person who leads PD, or that's the person who handles standardized testing organization in the school and so forth. And so these days, typically people are labeled instructional coach without having a job description that's actually built around what research says is the most effective instructional coaching practice. So if you look at what instructional coaching research says, what's the best thing for an instructional coach to do? It is to be working either one-on-one with teachers and classrooms, or can be with teams, could be grade level teams, content area teams, who are there of their own volition. Forced coaching has no research to support it. But if the teacher or the team wants to work with the coach, then what the coach is doing is it is taking the issue that the teacher or the team has brought to them. In other words, it's a teacher identified issue. This is something that's a problem for my students right now. This is something I need to deal with right now. And the coach can help collect data around that, help provide ideas for strategies around that, help the teacher to set a goal in that area for the students to improve, and then provide support with whatever ways the teacher wants until the students hit that goal. It's very student focused. In other words, it's not about trying to fix teachers who are perceived as a problem. That's not what instructional coaching is. It's not, or not what research-based instructional coaching is. Instead, it's respecting the professionalism of the teacher. They're bringing that issue to the coach, and the coach is supporting them in that. Now, will that teacher grow by leaps and bounds working with that coach on that thing? Yes, but they're much more deeply engaged in it because it's not about fixing them. It's not that they are feeling like they are not good or they're not capable. Instead, it's about, what do the students need right now? And that's what we're going to focus on, right? And so all of the learning for everybody, including the coach, comes along in service of that, instead of what so many people mistake the instructional coach role, which is that of a fixer. And so that fixer idea is very problematic. So people will send coaches in to try to fix perceived problematic people or problematic situations, but typically no real change occurs as a result of that, because the dynamic is set up from the beginning that that coach is coming in to fix me. And all the research in the world says that person's going to resist that.
I got so many questions. All right, Sharon. All right, help me out over here. Okay.
Yeah.
So, all right. So let's say our district has provided a Sharon Thomas to come in to our school, or even our district to be that person, right? And you talked about respecting the autonomy, the professional autonomy for that person to come in and reach out to you and say, hey, my kids can't read. I suck at reading and I don't want anyone to know when you come in. But no one comes to you, right? But you're there.
Yep.
And no one knows you because you're outside the district. And this is like, now the idea is that coaching means I'm either brand new or I'm broken. And I don't want any of these teachers in this school thinking, because I sure ain't brand new and I sure ain't broken, I ain't working with her. I don't trust her. I don't know her. How do you bridge that divide, right? Because I know that happens all the time.
Yeah. And you're going to hear me quote Jim Knight or paraphrase him a lot here, because there's a huge body of work on this by Jim, also Joellen Killian, also Elena Aguilar, so many people in the coaching world who focus specifically on these issues, because that's the typical scenario. What you just described. That's a typical scenario. Why would somebody trust someone coming in from the outside with something where they feel inadequate, or they feel like they're struggling, or they feel like their students are struggling? The best way to introduce a coach is to bring them in and say, here's Sharon, or whoever it is, and they've been a teacher like you. They know what it feels like to have mandates. They know what it feels like to have all these pressures on them at once. She's here for whatever you want to work on, whatever you want to discuss. So whether it's something going on with your students and you're not sure why that is, if it's some new practice that we've asked you to take on and you don't feel like you've gotten near enough information on it, she can provide that information for you, work with your kids on that with you if you want her to. But she's here for whatever you want to do. That helps the first round of, okay, she's not coming in to tell me what to do and how to do it, which is immediately feels like being treated like a child, and I'm going to resist that, even the most experienced teacher. But also an important thing for that leader to do is to say right away, here's what the instructional coach role is, and here's what it's not. Sharon can go into anybody's classroom who wants to work with her. She is not reporting back to me on how it's going with you. She's going to keep data on what she's working on. It's all going to be anonymized, and she's going to submit it to me, because she is not your supervisor, and I'm not going to ask her to act like one when she's in your room with you. Also, your conversations with her are completely confidential. So if you need to vent about this new program you've been asked to implement and she's going to listen to you, you don't have to worry at all that she's going to come back into my office and tell me what you said. It's not going to happen. And then walk the talk of that as much as possible. And setting that coach up for success to not be viewed negatively by the faculty is going to be on that leader and on other people perceived as leaders in the building. One of the best things a new coach can do is to ask, who are the people perceived as like the top gun teachers in this faculty? Go meet them and tell them, hey, I hear you're amazing. If you're willing to work with me on something, anything, you'll help people see that coaching is not for people who are just for people who are struggling or just for people who are in trouble for some reason. They'll see that it's a safe place where anybody can work. And people are usually very flattered by that and very eager to support that idea. It's why I was initially going to request a coach myself, and then an actual problem reared its head. And so I needed to ask for coaches' help anyway. But that team approach to all of the official and perceived leaders in the building can defray a lot of that tension a great deal.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Sharon, do you think there's a pivot in one of your earlier answers about the effectiveness of a coach? Could you added a phrase, research-based usage for the coach. Do you think there is a lot of discrepancy in how coaches, instructional coaches, are used across the country, across schools, across districts?
Yes. It's one of the biggest issues is the issue of role clarity. Jim has written about this issue of role clarity a lot. And when I worked for him, we talked about it all the time. And I've begun saying to audiences at some point, no role clarity, no peace. Like until you get the role clearly defined, everything's going to go off the rails. People are going to be suspicious of it on the teacher end because they don't know what that person's job is. If you start assigning that coach all of the PD in the building, all of the implementation support on the new programs, all of the coaching, all of the sort of quasi-administrative tasks that the assistant principals don't have time to do, they're not going to ever have the impact you want that role to have because they won't be working with enough teachers on enough student issues to have student data that says the coach made a difference. That's a number one problem with that, right? If you want to prove the effectiveness of that role to keep it with data, you've got to let that coach most of their day. And that means not giving them those things that take so much time away, like all of the PD, like coordinating, state testing and all of that. And so getting real clear about that, how that coach spends their time is one of the most important research-based issues. Because what research says is that when a coach is coaching the majority of their time and relationship building, to get more people to be willing to work with them, by the way, at the beginning of the school year. That's when coaching can be tied in student achievement and behavioral data to the coach's work. When you've got them doing every other administrative task in the world and spreading them really thin, like most coaches are, you're not going to get that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is I'm going to use a portmanteau here. Sometimes a necessary travesty because our poor leaders are understaffed, and if they're blessed with a coach who might have like this hour in their day where what you got going on, can you sling these praxis tests or whatever, and probably trying to build a relationship with a leader as well. We're not going to say hell no.
The most delightful employees in the world, coaches. They are.
We're not going to say no way. You know what I mean?
That's right.
Get out of here. You know what I mean? Let me prepare my coaching. We accommodate, and then we open up this Pandora's box of accommodation, and then we continue on, and then it probably keeps pulling us closer to the admin and farther away from our teachers, right? And I think that could be a little bit of an issue.
And you're not going to get the bump on data from coaching, and that role is going to get cut.
Exactly. And then
like we live in now, that role's gone.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a tricky thing. And I think what you talked about is having that expectation, not only from the principal level, but from the district level, and I think if it's a little too site-based, it might get a little funky. So I think there is a place for district oversight, especially, sometimes whoever's writing the check gets to make the rules. But I think that's more of a district perspective to kind of safeguard the process and the integrity of the process.
Jim 100% agrees. He's like, if you can have coaches not only just district organized, but district supervised instead of principal supervised, because coaches and principals love each other. They think, they think the world of each other. And that means that principal, with whatever metaphorical fire is blowing up in that moment, they're going to pull the coach in to help them. They're going to, unless there's somebody else saying that's not the agreement.
Yeah.
And even in my coach role, which because it was part-time teaching, part-time coaching, which usually is not a great idea. Because always the coach will like default to giving some of their coaching time to their students because the students will always pull them. And that was 100% true in my experience.
Yeah.
But the other problem with that was that meant that my teaching part of my day, my principal was my boss. The other half of my day, I was sort of shared by district leaders and the principal. And so constantly the district ELA coordinator had to intervene on the things I was being asked to do because it was just this constant battlefield. And so having a real high degree of clarity around that at the district level is one of the greatest things you can do for coaching.
Yeah.
I want to commit. I think our district where I work has a very strong coaching program, and we've got some phenomenal coaches. But there is that strong central voice of what a coach should and shouldn't do. So I want to commend like the vision that we have in our county. I think fits and aligns with what you're saying. I know our supervisor of coaches is a big fan of Jim Knight and his work, and she has worked to get her team very invested in doing things that way. And it is hard, and it's a hard balance. Like I know if I was a principal and I had a coach, there would be people who I would want that coach to work with, and pushing back on that suggestion can be really hard, I'm sure. You mentioned
way to do that too. One thing that Jim's organization has found is that if you have somebody who is struggling and you really want them to work with the coach, like you really want to do it, but the agreement is nobody's going to be forced to coach, which is as it should be. What you can do when having that discussion with that teacher on where they need to improve, being very specific with them. Here are the areas where you need to improve. Here are different resources we can offer you. You could take a course in classroom management if that's one of the issues. You could work with a peer of your choosing in your department or your grade level team to work on that if you want. You could work with the instructional coach on the issues, blah, blah. Put it on a menu and then let the teacher choose. They will usually choose the coach, right? Because in that situation, that's going to feel very appealing to me, to get that kind of support from somebody whose job is dedicated to support, but but if I'm not being forced to do it, that's face saving for me, right? That still gives me some dignity in the interaction. And there were times where I was forced to, had forced coaching, my assistant principal asked me, I think 3 times to work with different teachers who were in trouble, and they were forced to work with me. And it ended the way it always does, which is no real growth for that teacher. And because it starts off with them, the assistant principal would say, oh, it'll come so much better from you. No, it's doubly humiliating coming from your peer. All those messages about performance need to come from the supervisor, and they only will be helpful to have support from the coach if the teacher chooses to work with the coach.
Yeah.
Then having that menu option, though, that can work really well.
Sharon, I've got this is what I am fascinated where this question's going to go. Okay.
Yep.
And I have to kind of preface it with my bias. I have a bias with coaching. Okay. And it's a good bias, but it's a little bit different type of mindset. Dr. Worst and I, we've been buddies for, I don't know, damn near 30 years. We go back and forth with a lot. We're very similar about a lot of things. We're very different about a lot of things. And that's why I love this guy. Right. So Eric, I'm going to be curious about your thoughts too. All right.
Yep.
I totally am in line with coaching. I think it's vital. I think every professional, every true professional has a coach. Whether you're an actor, whether you're an athlete, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a doctor, even some people might think a therapist is a form of coaching, right? Because you're having that kind of relationship to help you with things, right? So if you are a professional, you have a professional obligation to grow. All right, so here's where I'm going with this. So I'm all in, but I am also you ready? Team first leader.
Yeah.
I am 1000%. That is the collective teacher efficacy, which is, the highest factor of school improvement, is when collective teams are constantly analyzing evidence of their impact. That collective teams are working together in that mutual accountability and collective responsibility and interdependently to make changes, positive changes for students. So yes, I do think there are individuals who need coaching, but I think if the research and the evidence backs coaching, but even more evidence backs collective teacher efficacy, what is the coach's role for coaching teams to maximize that impact versus individuals?
I'm delighted by this. Okay. So one of the workshops I used to have to facilitate when I worked for Jim was coaching teams. And I had a lot of that coaching teams material as well when I was in my district, and I was part of what we called the writing PLC. So when Common Core came down the road and we completely changed our entire ELA curriculum, different teachers were chosen from different middle and high schools to pilot the new stuff. And then we were going to serve as coaches for the other teachers when we rolled out the full thing the following year. Mm-hmm. So we had a coach for our team, a wonderful coach named Jean Clark, and who knew all of those strategies better than we did, who knew what she was doing, but she also knew coaching, and she also understood the key element in coaching, which is partnership, which is understanding that, yes, I know some things and I can help people with some things, but I don't know everything. That the people I'm working with know as many different things as I do, just maybe different things, right? And they don't need me for everything. They need me for some things. And so Jean very wisely helped to run that PLC as the coach of that team. So what does a coach do that's valuable when working with teams? Is they provide tools for structure and process to help the team get really clear on what is our purpose here, what's our mission driving this team, what do we need to do as part of that team? In other words, what are we creating, or what are we improving upon? What are we doing? How are we going to know we did that? How are we going to measure our products or measure our progress or whatever it is? And what do we all agree is like the shared outcome of this team? Sure. Having somebody in the coach role facilitate that is great, because it keeps all of the team members as partners as well. So nobody who's like one of the teachers or one of the administrators, whatever kind of team it is perceived as the one who's in charge, because the coach is going overtime trying to make sure that they're just viewed as a partner and a facilitator, and they are just making it possible for the people in the room to share leadership with each other. And so that also opens up the team to understand, all right, if we've agreed, this is our mission, and the team agrees to all of it, right? The team sets the norms, the team sets the whole game, right? Of here's how we're going to try and get to this thing that we're supposed to do. That also opens the door to autonomy for people, because when you're clear on what you need to do and what the outcome needs to be, that's when, well, okay, if I'm responsible for this piece of that, and I know it's got to be this, this, and this, if I have to go in a particular path that I think is the right path, I can, as long as I'm coming out with the thing we all agreed is what I need to be producing. Because autonomy is so misunderstood, I think, by people in the workplace. They think it means just doing whatever you want.
Doing whatever you want.
Autonomy. Nobody has total autonomy.
Right.
Nobody at all. I worked for Jim Knight, the partnership guy. I didn't have total autonomy. I couldn't just go present whatever workshop I wanted to. We all have structures and limits and requirements and expectations, right? It's when those things are really clear that then I know where I can move to the beat of my own drummer, right? Where I can do this particular thing my way, and I'm still in line with the things that are expected of me. And that's the real key to autonomy for everybody, is when the leader's real clear on what the requirements are, what the expectations are, what the structures are. When the employees are the same, then how you need to get to there, that's how you get to there. And you've got
I love it.
Degree of freedom.
You answered the question beautifully. I didn't even have to set you up. I mean, you nailed it. Because I've asked some coaches that question. They're like, no, I work with individuals. Like they've got that kind of mindset, and maybe they don't have the, a background about a culture of professional learning communities or the collective teacher efficacy work. And people, I say this all the time, people lead how they were led. Teachers teach how they were taught. Coaches coach how they were coached sometimes. If they were even coached. So I'm glad that perspective that you have is so common. And I love what you said about if the team can get very clear, then that individual coaching was like, all right, Eric, how can we help you get to that goal, that collective goal that you guys just got to? And like, let's work.
That's right.
On it. Yeah. Love
That's
it.
right. In fact, it might engender more coaching requests because then everybody's clear on what the expectations are.
Love it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate also what you said, because I think you gave bits for both he and me, both him and me, because you talked about autonomy, which I think is important, but I think it was a autonomy within margins. So here are your boundaries. What you do between those boundaries is up to you. So again, that's what I think that's important to have, that autonomy, especially when you're succeeding. Like you said, you just can't have autonomy for the sake of autonomy. But if you have autonomy in the means of doing something, if you've got a shared goal you want students to achieve, how the three of us get there, to me, is less important than all of us getting there. So if we have our own ways of doing them, that's fine for me. Nathaniel?
I love Daniel Pink. I don't know if you got, Sharon, you're reading it like Drive or any of Daniel Pink's work. Eric, do you know what, you ever read any of Daniel Pink's work?
I do. Yep.
I think it's in his book.
It's actually a big part of Jim's stuff is Drive.
Oh, Get Out. That's awesome. That's outstanding. So I've got the book somewhere over here. I was just dusting it off and reading it. I like to reorganize all these books because then it forces me to like, oh, I got to read that again. You know what I mean? But anyway, I was reading some Drive by Daniel Pink, and he talked about the autonomy, mastery, and purpose as being three big levers to engagement, like just adult engagement and professional engagement. So I love when we talk about autonomy, because there is, and it goes back to, I've worked with some teachers who are, you hired me to be the professional, stay the hell out of my way. I'm going to close the door. I'm going to teach these kids. You hired me, Dr. Worster, to be a professional. I don't need no coach. You trust me. You leave me alone. I don't need to collaborate with anybody. I'm going to get good scores regardless of what happens. Okay, that's cool if the culture of the school is that script, right? I'm hiring individual contractors. Leave me alone. You don't need coaching. You don't need teams. Go forth and be great, whatever. So for those, that sense of autonomy might be beautiful. It might be wonderful. My sense of autonomy is more autonomy and alignment, because at this organization, at my school, our school, it is very clear what autonomy looks like. You are hired to be part of a team to engage in collective teacher efficacy. And if that is for you, this is the school. This is what autonomy means for you. So I think that term autonomy is very abstract, and where Eric and I both ran our schools very, very differently. So the interpretation of autonomy for Dr. Worster might be different from me. I think was when we don't articulate that from the front end, it's when mistakes happen. And I think if that makes sense.
The issue around expectations is so huge. And we wrote a book a few years ago called Evaluating Instructional Coaching. It was myself, Jim, Michelle Harris, and Ann Hoffman. And the reason we wrote that was because one of the biggest FAQs is, how do you evaluate coaches and coaching programs? Yeah. Usually coaches are evaluated with some sort of MacGyvered version of the teacher evaluation form or the guidance counselor form, whatever it is. And then coaching programs are rarely evaluated like as a program, as an entity, right? And because they're just usually viewed as positions. And so we wrote a book about that. And the final chapter is on how do you sustain a coaching program? That issue of clarity around what things are is the thing that so often gets kicked to the curb. And it's really, it sounds so boring to say it, but it's actually the key. It makes everything possible. When you don't have clarity around what things are, things fall apart. And so, for example, I had total autonomy when I was a student teacher at Hayfield High School in Fairfax County, Virginia in 1989. I came in, my cooperating teacher said, I'm almost finished with grade expectations. Then what do you want to teach? This is before the standards movement. Whatever you wanted. That was horrible. I had no idea what to do because I didn't know what good was then. I didn't know what the right things were. I didn't even know what the wrong things were to choose, right? So that was really horrible for me. It was like, it was way too much, right? So when the standards movement comes along, I'm actually very on board with that as a concept. We've done some not so great things in the service of it, but in general, I really like the idea of the standards, because then it said, all right, if as long as the kids are learning these key things, and you are picking texts that are engaging and are appropriate for them, and and it can help with them with their reading progress and all of that, then you're good, right? Having that structure to guide me gave me more freedom than total autonomy did. Because what was I doing with total autonomy? I was asking a million questions of my cooperating teacher every day. Because
That's a great point.
There was no guidance at all, right?
Yeah.
But when I know, all right, here's the thing I have to work within, and that's what they want from me. Okay. Because if we zoom out, and so often people will perceive, negative reactions around PD or negative responses to evaluation and all of that from employees. The hard, cold truth is that all employees in any field want to do a good job and they want to please their employer. That's true of everybody. If my employer is really clear with me about what the expectations are and gives me good information in the form of a rubric or whatever else about what excellent performance is, I can feel like that is possible, and I can trust that that leader is kind of with me on that. When I'm not getting clear expectations and I'm not getting a clear sense of what excellent performance is, then that leader feels unfair and wishy-washy to me. They're going to evaluate me one way and the person in the classroom next door another way, and so forth, right? I can be killing myself working so hard, and the person who's phoning it in down the hallway gets the same evaluation.
Right.
That kind of thing. So often we think that if we give people real clear expectations and standards and clear idea of what excellent performance is, that they're going to be angry about that they're going to be insulted by that, right? And initially, if they've never had it before, that might be true. That's why as a leader, you've got to ride that out, because in the end, clarity always wins. Knowing what you want. In every job I've ever had, ice cream store, medical publishing, education, whatever it's been, tell me what you want. I'll give you what you want, but you've got to get what you want.
Clarity precedes competence, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
always,
right.
Always.
And I love what you just said, because you talked about all three of those items that Daniel Pink references. You talked about autonomy. You talked about a sense of mastery. Like, I want to know that I'm good at some things, right?
Yes.
And then why am I doing this? What's my why? That's the purpose. So autonomy, mastery, and purpose. That's fascinating. So thank you so much for breaking that down, man. Awesome.
I could literally talk about this all day because it's that thing where when you've seen it enough, and probably you two are at the same, like when you're at these points in your careers, right? And you've seen people make that same kind of mistake, sounds mean, but like where they're kind of afraid to really stand up for clear expectations and standards. And it's like, no, that's really what people want from you, even if they don't realize it yet. They really do want to do a good job and feel like they're just really, that their time that they're expending and all this effort in these incredibly difficult roles, that's worth it.
Awesome.
Sharon, I have a tough question, and kind of, you mentioned this a little bit. You mentioned evaluating instructional coaches. How would you, and just broader, how would you evaluate a successful coaching program?
So the way we recommend it, and it's kind of mapped out in the book, is that first you start with your standards. All right, what are the standards for excellent instructional coaching in the way we're defining it as a district? We put a set of standards in the book for what we think based on the research, but with encouraging people to modify that as they think it's important for how they're defining that role of instructional coaching. Then deciding, all right, so then what are our evidence pieces for that? So is something like test scores going to be part of that? Is that a problem for an employee's evaluation? If that's got to be done by May or June and the test scores are lagging in July, you're probably not going to be able to use that, right? Unless you determine that they're lagging data from the year before or something can play a role or whatever. But it might be instead that there are going to be periodic sort of benchmark things that are along the way. But importantly, we recommend a 360 evaluation for instructional coaches, not where teachers have any say in the actual evaluation. That's all on the principal or the district person who's the actual, legitimate supervisor, but that you get input in the form of multiple choice questions on surveys so that there's no room for bias in a comment box. Comment boxes are big trouble on an employee's evaluation because
Yeah.
they open the door to bias comments.
Yep.
But you basically ask them questions about like, how did this person approach you? In other words, were you approached as a partner, or did you get to choose what you're working on, what the strategy is, and so forth? Did the coach offer you different data collection forms? Did they offer you different strategies and so forth? Because there's an element there where the coach can be heavily influential on how that student progress goes. It's also true that the teacher is the decider there, right? So it's not like it's this one-to-one connection of like, if the coach does everything the coach needs to do, the kids are definitely going to grow in, the way the teacher
Right.
wants them to. But you are going to see growth in a situation like that if the teachers are responding, yes, like they treated me like I was a partner. They didn't try to force me to do anything. They did give me these options on all of that. That's also a sign to the leader that coaching is going to grow, because that first year, focusing too much on the number of people who are willing to be coached by the teacher is not very helpful, because the teacher is fighting all kinds of battles that they didn't set up in doing that. They may have to fight how they were introduced to people. If they were introduced to the school, like, oh, this is Sharon and she's going to, if you have a problem, go see her. And it's sort of set up as a fixer model from the start. That's going to be that coach's problem the whole year, right? But once you're into like that second year, then you can start to see, all right, what was the growth in the number of people who worked with you last year compared to this year? And then in year 3, what's the difference in the number of the people who are, because that indicates the relationship building and so forth that you want happening. Are you working with any teams now when you weren't working with any teams last year, and so on? So you're looking at it from a multifaceted, multi-data piece standpoint, so that you're embracing the complexity of the job and not trying to fight it with like a single score. And so having that kind of process in place, either when the role is started, if it's new, or switching to that, if they've been on that kind of MacGyvered form, is something that takes time to make happen. But that is one of the things too, that so often we just don't give things time enough to show their real value before that tyranny of urgency tells us we have to kick it to the curb.
Wow.
I agree.
Man, Sharon, you're an outstanding guest. You're fascinating. You are just so solid and so approachable. I mean, I think I want to be coached by you. I don't know if we need to sign a contract or something, like a coaching contract or something.
I would love to be, and coaching leaders was something I never did in my buildings. I was there to coach teachers, but coaching leaders is something I had to do when I was working at ICG. And boy, did I love it. The first time I had to coach a superintendent, I was sweating, I could be any help to this person at all. But when you have a process for coaching, you don't need to have done that person's job to support them figuring out what they want to do about it, and so coaching leaders is one of the greatest things that you can do also to create and establish a coaching culture too.
Sharon, we got to head on out, but I just want the audience and the listeners to find you. So where do we find you? Where can we find you?
So now at the Touchstones Discussion Project, we're over on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, but we work all over the world. My email address there is sharon@touchstones.org, and I would love to hear anybody's questions about any kind of support for schools that they want to talk about.
And the name of your book?
We published 2 books that I wrote while I was at ICG. One is called The Instructional Playbook, and that is about coaching cycle process itself. And then the second one was evaluating instructional coaching.
Oh man, I'm going to go on Amazon right now and I'm going to get them. So I love it. Sharon, thanks so much. Dr. Worsham and I may be heading up to Baltimore in a couple of weeks, and we're gonna grab you at the Eastern Shore, and we're gonna get a beer and a crab cake. Let's do it.
You do it. I live right here in Baltimore, so anytime, let me know.
I love it.
All right.
Thank you so much, Sharon.
All right,
Take care.
you.
Thanks for joining us on the Community Connection. Awesome. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure.